So I was pretty excited when I saw the results of the phase 3 trials with the COVID-19 vaccines, specifically the RNA vaccines that have now been approved, because they're very effective at preventing COVID infections. So because I'm a healthcare worker, I was one of the first batch of people to get vaccinated. But I understand that some people are skeptical and are scared. And I thought that maybe the first video can focus on explaining how these vaccines work so that with knowledge you can make a better decision about getting vaccinated. And I hope it helps, and let's get to it. SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that leads to COVID-19 disease. This virus is transmitted from person to person, mostly through droplets that leave the mouth or the nose of the infected person when they cough, speak, or when they simply breathe out. The virus then infects a new host via their epithelial cells, which are these cells here, that coat the lining of our nose, mouths, and lungs, and basically separate the outside from the inside of our bodies. So let's look at what happens inside the cell. SARS-CoV-2 uses a protein on its surface called the spike protein to attach to and get inside the epithelial cell. Once inside, it basically hijacks the cell's machinery to make more SARS-CoV-2 viruses. And the way it does this is by first releasing the RNA it has inside. RNA is a molecule that has a code containing the detailed instructions needed to make new viral proteins. The ribosomes that are found inside our cells are in charge of reading this RNA code and following the instructions to produce the viral proteins. The RNA coming from the virus has instructions from all different parts required to make up new SARS-CoV-2 viruses. So in essence, an infected cell turns into a SARS-CoV-2 virus-producing factory. The ribosome will make new spike proteins, proteins that coat the virus like an envelope, and also a protein that can replicate RNA, and that's the protein here. It's like a copy machine copying the sequence code into new RNA molecules, which are engulfed by the new viruses. Once it is complete with all the components, including new RNA, the virus then leaves the cell to infect other cells in our lungs and tissues. Eventually, the replication process of the virus kills the infected cell, causing a lot of damage. The immune system is the only thing capable of stopping the virus. It is a system composed of a lot of different kinds of cells, which are called white blood cells. They all have different jobs to do to help combat the virus. This is the first immune cell I will introduce you to, and it's called a dendritic cell. And dendritic cells are everywhere in our bodies, especially in tissues that have close contact with the outside world, where they're constantly patrolling the area and looking for foreign invaders, like viruses. And their specialty is finding proteins that are not supposed to be in our bodies, like in this case, a spike protein from SARS-CoV-2. They gather up these proteins as quickly as they can and bring them to the nearest lymph node. And they do this by traveling through our lymphatic vessels, which are basically white blood cell highway systems that are present throughout our bodies. In the meantime, they chop up the protein into pieces and choose the pieces that look more dangerous and can cause an immune reaction, and these are called antigens. This is a lymph node, which are basically like castles, strongholds, full of all different types of immune cells ready to start a battle when there is an intruder in our bodies. Once the dendritic cell gets to the lymph node, it then finds a T helper cell. And these cells decide whether the chopped up pieces of protein come from a normal cell in our bodies or from an intruder. So they inspect it, and once they have recognized that this is indeed an antigen that belongs to something dangerous, they perform their second action. Like an army general, they in turn recruit other white blood cells, directing them to attack anything in our bodies that has that specific antigen. Then, the helper T cells, B cells, and cytotoxic T cells replicate themselves to increase the size of the army to specifically combat SARS-CoV-2. B cells mount their attack by first multiplying and then making a lot of antibodies. Antibodies have sticky ends that are designed to stick specifically to the antigen, like an arrow reaching a target, ignoring all other proteins. and T cells get ready to fight in cell-to-cell direct combat. Both the T cells and the antibodies leave the lymph node and circulate in our blood, traversing all through our bodies until they find the site of infection, which in this case of COVID-19 is mostly the lungs. The antibodies will rapidly attach to the antigen on SARS-CoV-2, covering the virus and damaging it by activating a cascade of molecules in our blood that are called complement, who poke holes in the virus and destroy it. But the antibodies also serve as a flag, alerting other cells of the immune system, including neutrophils and macrophages, whose job it is to eat, or in other words, phagocytose the virus. For their part, T cells will also see the antigen on the infected cells and specifically attack the infected cells. T cells are very efficient and can kill multiple infected cells quickly, preventing further replication of the virus. The process ends with the immune system producing what are called memory T and B cells. These cells can live for many years, even a lifetime. Memory B cells continue to produce antibodies so that if another SARS-CoV-2 virus infects our bodies later on, it is instantly coated with these molecules and killed. At the same time, memory T cells are masters of attack, like samurai. They can kill any newly infected cell much quicker, and they can multiply faster, so the army against SARS-CoV-2 can awaken again when needed. Since SARS-CoV-2 is a new virus for humans, we still don't know how long the immune memory lasts. But we hope it is enough so that people who have gotten sick in the last year are able to fight it off if reinfected. So now that you know the process of COVID-19 infection, you can easily understand how the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine works. I will briefly explain the 3 different vaccine types that are now either approved or close in the pipeline of approval. I will start with the one that has more steps involved. This is a vaccine developed by the collaboration between Oxford and AstraZeneca, and it's made of a virus called an adenovirus, which carries DNA sequence for the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein instead of its own genes. Adenoviruses are ubiquitous and frequently infect our bodies throughout our lives. But unlike the living viruses, this customized vaccine adenovirus is unable to divide, replicate, because its DNA does not have the code to produce the proteins that the virus needs to replicate. So it can't cause damage like live viruses do. However, it can still enter the cells of our body it comes in contact with. In this case, it's a muscle cell since the vaccine is injected in our arm muscle. And it takes the DNA code for the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein to the nucleus of the cell. In the cell nucleus, there's an RNA polymerase, whose job it is to translate the DNA into RNA. It's basically a translator turning one language into another so that the ribosome can understand the code and start making new spike proteins. Again, because this virus can't replicate, it will not harm the muscle cell, so it is basically friendly. This vaccine has been approved in some countries, and the benefit is that the adenovirus protects the DNA, so it is not necessary to keep the vaccine in ultra-cold temperatures, and it can easily be distributed and manufactured for billions of people. Now let's review the RNA vaccines that are actually now approved in the US. These are the vaccine made in collaboration between Pfizer and BioNTech, and the vaccine manufactured by Moderna. These vaccines are made of the RNA sequence of SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. RNA on its own is very delicate and fragile, which is why, for it to be effectively taken to the cell, they surrounded the RNA with lipid nanoparticles. Lipids are fats. In this case, their job is to protect the RNA and also fuse with the cell membrane, like a delivery system that gets the RNA inside of the cell. Once inside the cell, the ribosome, as instructed by the RNA code, will start producing spike proteins. Because of the lipid nanoparticles and the RNA components, these vaccines must be kept at low temperatures to make it to our cells without getting damaged in transportation and storage. There's also another vaccine being developed by the company Novobax. This vaccine uses a molecule that binds many SARS-CoV-2 spike proteins together And it also has an added component, which is a honeycomb-like molecule from a plant that is known to alert and activate the immune system. But regardless of which vaccine is used, the end result is that SARS-CoV-2 spike protein is picked up by our dendritic cells. And then, the immune reaction begins in the same way it does when there is a COVID-19 infection, but without any infectious virus causing damage to our body. The antigen is taken to the lymph node, presented to the T helper cell, who recognizes it and orchestrates an immune reaction against it, including the production of antibodies by B cells that will bind to the spike protein and an army of T cells that can attack anything with the spike protein on it or in it. The goal is to develop long-lasting memory immunity so that we have a constant supply of antibodies and an army of trained T cells ready to instantly kill SARS-CoV-2 the moment it appears and before it can cause disease if it ever shows its spikes. Once 70 to 80% of us have immunity to SARS-CoV-2, either because we survived infection or were vaccinated, the virus will not be able to survive because it needs to infect hosts to replicate and propagate. So the sooner enough of us get vaccinated, the faster we will finally be able to go back to our lives without the need for physical distancing. Thank you all for listening, and we'll end with a little video of me getting my vaccine. Thank you.
Ready?
Yeah.